Imagine waking up next to the most powerful person in the world. The air you breathe is thick with secrets. The marble floors you walk on are polished with paranoia. Your whispers, spoken in the quiet of the pre-dawn hours, could build empires or fund legions. But a single misplaced word, a flicker of ambition in your eyes, could mean your own swift and silent execution. This isn't fantasy. This was the daily reality for anyone who lived in the shadow of a Roman emperor. We often picture the Roman emperor as this solitary godlike figure, standing alone and shaking continents with his decisions. But that image, it's a carefully constructed myth. Behind the marble facade of power, there was always someone else. A companion, a confidant, an advisor, a friend, and sometimes a lover. They were the emperor's secretaries, his best friends, and occasionally, his most dangerous enemies. They wielded immense influence while walking a razor's edge between unimaginable privilege and terrifying peril. This is the story of their secret life, a life of power, intimacy, and the constant, chilling fear of the fall. So, who were these figures, these ghosts at the imperial banquet? When we say companion, we're not just talking about a buddy to share a cup of wine with. The Roman imperial court was a complex ecosystem of power, and the emperor's inner circle was a wild mix of individuals, each with their own unique line to the throne. First, you had the official advisors, the Amici Caesaris, or Friends of Caesar. This was a formal council of high-ranking senators and equestrians, basically, men of immense wealth and political clout. Augustus started this group, the Concilium Principis, to make it look like he was still consulting the great minds of the state, giving his rule a nice republican sheen. These were the establishment guys, the old guard, who advised on law, military campaigns, and foreign policy. But the real power, the kind that operated behind the scenes, often lay with people from much humbler backgrounds. Let's talk about the Praetorian Prefect. This was the commander of the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite personal bodyguards. What started as a military job morphed into one of the most powerful positions in the empire under ambitious men. The prefect controlled the only army in the city of Rome, which made him both the emperor's ultimate protector and his most immediate threat. A guy like Lucius Aelius Sejanus, under the emperor Tiberius, became more than a bodyguard. He became the de facto ruler of Rome, the gatekeeper to the emperor himself. Then we get to one of the most fascinating groups, the imperial freedmen. These were former slaves, often Greek, who had been freed and now served in the emperor's personal bureaucracy. In a society obsessed with status, these guys were outsiders, but their jobs gave them insane levels of power. They were the emperor's personal secretaries, managing his mail, his money, and his calendar. A freedman like Tiberius Claudius Narcissus, who was the correspondence secretary for the emperor Claudius, became one of the most powerful men of his day. He controlled the flow of information to and from the emperor, and in the process, he amassed a fortune that made senators green with envy. Because they owed everything, their freedom, their wealth, their status, to the emperor, they were often seen as more loyal than the aristocrats who had their own family legacies to worry about. And finally, you had the personal companions, the tutors and philosophers who shaped an emperor's mind, like Seneca advising a young Nero or Marcus Cornelius Fronto, a beloved teacher to the philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius. These relationships were built on ideas and emotions, influencing the very character of the ruler. And of course, there were the favorites, the lovers, both male and female, whose intimate access gave them a unique and often dangerous kind of influence. The story of Emperor Hadrian and his beloved Antinous is a perfect example. When Antinous tragically drowned, a devastated Hadrian declared him a god and founded a city in his name. A huge public display of a deeply personal bond. So this inner circle wasn't one single thing. It was a constantly shifting constellation of soldiers, aristocrats, ex-slaves, and intellectuals. Each one offered the emperor something different, and each one, in turn, was playing their own game in the treacherous currents of the imperial court. To really get what it was like to be an emperor's companion, we have to look past the grand titles and get into the daily rhythm of the palace. What was it actually like being chained to the center of the Roman world? It was a relentless grind, a life where your personal and political lives were completely fused from sunrise to the dead of night. The day began before dawn. While Rome slept, the emperor's closest companions were already up and seeing him, even before the traditional morning greeting, the salutatio. This wasn't for pleasantries. It was straight to work. Overnight, couriers would have galloped in from every corner of the empire, from the foggy frontiers of Britain to the scorching deserts of Syria, carrying urgent news of troop movements, tax reports, and intelligence on potential threats. The companion's first job was to be a human filter. Imagine the fire hose of information. It was their duty to read, sort, and prioritize a mountain of documents, briefing the emperor only on what was most critical. This was the world of the imperial secretaries, the freedmen like Narcissus. They didn't just pass along messages, they framed the issues. Their choice of words, what they decided to emphasize or leave out, that was an act of immense power in itself. As the morning wore on, the work shifted. The emperor was the supreme judge of the Roman world, and his companions often sat with him during legal cases, listening to everything from property disputes to treason trials. A quiet word from an advisor could sway the emperor's judgment, saving one person's life while condemning another. Then came the political meetings with senators, generals, and foreign envoys. Companions were right there, not just taking notes, but acting as trusted counselors. Tiberius relied so heavily on his praetorian prefect, Sejanus, that he called him Socius Laborum, my partner in my toils. For all intents and purposes, Sejanus was running the day-to-day of the empire while Tiberius became more and more reclusive. But life wasn't all scrolls and statecraft. Even leisure time was political. Going hunting or visiting the public baths might seem like a chance for the emperor to relax, but his companions were always there. These informal settings were often where the real work got done, where a companion could speak more freely and strengthen their bond with the ruler. The day usually ended with the grand imperial banquet, the convivium. This was the centerpiece of court life, but it was anything but a relaxed dinner party. The banquet was political theater. Where you sat showed your status. Being close to the emperor was the ultimate sign of favor, making the seating chart a public map of the court's power structure. The conversation was a delicate dance of flattery, debate, and subtle maneuvering. Alliances were forged over wine and roasted peacock, and rivals watched each other for any sign of weakness. For the companion, the day never really ended. Even after dinner, the emperor might call a late-night council or just want someone to read with. They were perpetually on call, their lives dictated by the needs and whims of one man. It was a life of opulent surroundings but zero personal freedom, a life lived inside a golden cage. Living in the emperor's orbit was exhausting, so why do it? Simple. Proximity to the emperor was the ultimate source of power, wealth, and influence in the Roman world. For a companion, this closeness was a currency more valuable than gold. First and foremost, companions were the gatekeepers. Everyone wanted something from the emperor, but they couldn't just walk up to him. They had to go through his inner circle. A companion could grant or deny access, fast-track a petition, or let it die on a shelf. This made them the ultimate brokers of power. Men like the freedmen Narcissus and Pallas became so influential under Claudius that powerful senators had to suck up to them, allegedly offering huge bribes just to get a message to the emperor's desk. This influence naturally led to staggering wealth. Imperial favor came with lavish gifts, sprawling estates, luxurious villas, and mountains of cash. The freedman Narcissus was said to have a fortune of 400 million sesterces, a sum so vast it was probably larger than the entire treasury of some kingdoms. This wasn't just for show, it was a tool. It allowed them to become patrons themselves, building their own networks of loyalty that stretched their influence far beyond the palace walls. But for the most ambitious, it wasn't just about money or backroom deals. It was about shaping the destiny of the Roman Empire. They went from being advisors to being co-rulers in all but name. The case of Sejanus is the most extreme example. While Tiberius was off on his island villa on Capri, Sejanus took command in Rome. He controlled the Praetorian Guard, influenced appointments, and systematically started to eliminate his rivals, even members of the Imperial family. For several years, making an enemy of Sejanus was like making an enemy of the state. His birthday was a public holiday, and his statues were put up right next to the emperor's. For a time, he was the most powerful and feared man in Rome. Other companions were more subtle. Philosophers like Seneca tried to use their closeness to Nero to mold him into a just, stoic ruler. For the first 5 years of Nero's reign, a period known as the Quinquennium Neronis, Seneca and the Praetorian prefect Burrus basically ran the empire, and it's remembered as a time of good, stable government. They tried to guide policy and temper Nero's worst impulses. Their story shows a different kind of ambition, not just for personal power, but for the power to do good. Of course, this level of influence was intoxicating. It could make a man born a slave, like Narcissus, feel like he was the emperor's equal. But climbing that high was like scaling an icy mountain. The view was breathtaking, but one wrong step meant a very long, very fatal fall. For every story of a companion's incredible rise, there's another of their spectacular fall. The same closeness that gave them power also painted a giant target on their back. To live in the emperor's shadow was to live with a knife permanently at your throat, and the hand holding it could belong to a jealous rival, a new empress, or most terrifyingly, the emperor himself. Absolute power didn't just corrupt, it bred absolute paranoia. The life and death of Sejanus is the ultimate cautionary tale. For years he was Tiberius's right-hand man, his partner in his toils, but his ambition got the best of him. He wasn't content being the power behind the throne. He wanted a spot on it. He tried to marry into the imperial family, a clear signal that he saw himself as a potential successor, not a servant. That was a step too far. The ever-suspicious Tiberius, warned of Sejanus's plotting, engineered his downfall with chilling precision. He didn't just have Sejanus arrested. No, that would be too simple. He played him. He sent a long, rambling letter to be read aloud in the Senate. It started with praise, lulling Sejanus into a false sense of security. But as the letter went on, the tone slowly twisted, ending with a sudden, shocking order for his arrest. The same senators who had been congratulating him moments before immediately turned on him. He was dragged to prison and executed that same day. The Roman mob, which had once cheered for him, tore his statues down and ripped his body to pieces in the streets. His fall was as swift and brutal as his rise had been spectacular. The fate of the freedmen was just as shaky. Their power was tied completely to the personal favor of one man. When that man died, his successor usually brought in their own team. The freedman Narcissus had been fiercely loyal to Claudius, even exposing a plot by the Empress Messalina and saving his throne. But that loyalty became his death sentence. After Claudius died, poisoned, some said, by his new wife, Agrippina the Younger, she moved fast to secure power for her own son, Nero. Narcissus had backed the wrong horse. He had supported Claudius's biological son. With his protector gone, Narcissus was helpless. Agrippina had him arrested and driven to suicide. His years of faithful service meant nothing. This was the terrifying reality. The political landscape of the court shifted constantly. A new marriage, a new heir, a crisis on the frontier, anything could reshuffle the hierarchy overnight. The person who was the emperor's most trusted confidant on Monday could be an enemy of the state by Friday. Life was a constant performance of loyalty, a tightrope walk over a chasm of suspicion, where looking down, or looking too far up, meant certain death. The secret life of a Roman emperor's companion was one giant paradox. It was a life of incredible influence at the very center of the world's greatest power. These were the people whose advice could shape an emperor's legacy and whose skills could hold an empire together. They could rise from nothing to command the fear and respect of the highest aristocrats. But that gilded life was also a prison. It was a life of constant, gnawing anxiety, where every word was weighed and every relationship was a potential trap. The companion was just a reflection of the emperor himself. His power was borrowed, his safety was conditional, and his life was ultimately not his own. They walked the corridors of power, but they never truly possessed it. They were partners in toil, keepers of secrets, and, all too often, the first casualties when the political winds changed. So the next time you picture a Roman emperor standing all alone, remember the shadows dancing around him. Remember the ambitious general, the loyal ex-slave, and the wise philosopher. Remember the people who woke up every morning next to absolute power, knowing their whispers could change history, but that the emperor's whisper could just as easily end it. Who do you think was the most influential imperial companion, and was their power ultimately a gift or a curse? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden world of the Roman court, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more stories from history, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update.